Welcome to Terrormouth, where the night doesn't just hold secrets, it remembers them. Story 1. The Countdown House. The last minute of the year, Briar Hollow, did not announce its boundaries. There was no welcome sign, no speed limit change, no cheerful board advertising community events. One moment Daniel Mercer was driving through a snow-lined highway surrounded by pine trees. The next he was inside the town streets, narrowing, houses pressing closer together, the sky dimming as if the clouds hung lower here. The GPS cut out 3 miles before he arrived. Daniel didn't think much of it at first. Small towns often had poor signal. Still, something about Briar Hollow felt immediately wrong, not hostile, not openly threatening, but watchful. Like a place that noticed you the moment you entered. The houses were old, not abandoned, but tired. Their paint was faded, porches sagging under the weight of years of snow. Curtains twitched when Daniel passed, though no one stepped outside to greet him. No children played in the streets. No dogs barked. It was December 10th, 3 weeks before New Year's Eve. Daniel was a freelance journalist, the kind who hunted for stories in forgotten places, towns with secrets buried under politeness and silence. Briar Hollow had appeared in his research as a statistical anomaly, unusually low crime, oddly consistent death records, and a population that never seemed to grow. People moved out, no one moved in, except him. His rental house sat near the center of town, a narrow 2-story structure with pale siding and a porch that creaked when he stepped on it. The key slid into the lock smoothly, as if it had been waiting. Inside the house smelled faintly of dust and cold wood. Everything worked: electricity, heat, water, too normal for how empty the town felt. That evening, his landlord arrived. Mrs. Klein was older than she looked, moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned not to rush anything. She handed him a folded lease agreement and watched him sign it without blinking. When Daniel finished, she hesitated, fingers tightening around her purse. "One thing," she said. Daniel looked up. "Sure, on New Year's Eve," she said slowly. "Don't open the door." He smiled politely. "Even if someone knocks." Her lips pressed into a thin line. Especially then, the smile faded from his face. "Is this some kind of tradition?" "No," she said. "It's a rule." She left immediately after, without another word. Over the next few days, Daniel explored Briar Hollow. There was a diner, a grocery store, a hardware shop, and a post office. That was it. No bars, no theaters, no community centers, no churches open to the public. There were no decorations anywhere, no Christmas lights, no wreaths, no signs of celebration. When Daniel asked about New Year's events, the reactions were always the same: silence, unease, then avoidance. At the diner, the waitress froze mid-pour when he mentioned it. "We don't celebrate," she said quietly. "Why not?" She looked at the door, then at the clock, then back at him. "Eat your food," she said, "and don't ask questions that make people uncomfortable." At the grocery store, a man leaned close to him while pretending to inspect canned soup. "If you're still here on the 31st, the man whispered, "turn off your lights before midnight." Daniel frowned. "Why?" The man's face drained of color. He pushed his cart away and left the store without another word. By December 20th, Daniel began documenting everything. Audio notes, written observations, patterns. Briar Hollow wasn't just quiet, it was waiting. Every calendar he saw stopped at December. Every clock in public places ran 5 minutes fast, and every single person in town went inside before sunset. On December 29th, Daniel noticed something else. There were no doorbells. Not a single house had one new. Year's Eve arrived under heavy snowfall. By 5 p.m., the town had already shut down. Shops closed early. Streetlights flickered on, then off again, one by one, until the streets were lit only by moonlight reflecting off the snow. Daniel stayed, awake deliberately. He told himself it was professional curiosity. He had heard enough warnings to know something was wrong, but fear had not yet outweighed the need to understand. At 10:30 p.m., his phone lost signal completely. At 11 p.m., the heater began to struggle, clicking uselessly as cold seeped into the walls. At 11:30 p.m., the town fell completely silent. No wind, no animals, no distant traffic. It felt like the world had ended and forgotten to tell him. Daniel sat in the dark living room, recorder on the table, clock glowing red on the wall. The ticking grew louder with every passing minute. At 11:57 p.m., the temperature dropped sharply. His breath fogged the air. The walls creaked not from settling, but as if something moved inside them. At 11:58 p.m., the knocking began. One slow tap against the front door. Knock. Dot. Daniel's single quotes art jumped into his throat. He didn't move. Another knock followed. Polite, patient, knock, knock. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried weight like it wasn't meant for ears. But for something deeper than the voice came Dot. Low, calm, familiar in a way that made his skin crawl. Daniel Mercer, it said softly. I'm right on time. His blood turned to ice. No one in Briar Hollow knew his full name. The clock read 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 7 seconds. You don't have to be afraid, the voice continued. This only takes a minute. Daniel backed away, every instinct screaming at him not to respond. His phone screen went black. The lights flickered once twice, then died completely. Only the red glow of the clock remained. The knocking resumed. Faster now. Knock, knock, knock. If you don't open the door, the voice whispered. Suddenly closer. I'll have to knock somewhere else. The floor vibrated gently, as if something shifted beneath the house. Daniel covered his ears, shaking violently. At 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 50 seconds, the voice changed. It sounded desperate. I've been alone for so long, it said. Please. The knocking stopped. The clock ticked. 11:59:58. The voice screamed not in anger, but in terror. I don't want to start over. The clock struck midnight. Silence flooded the house. No knock, no voice, no movement. Daniel collapsed to the floor, gasping, alive. Morning came slowly. Police cars lined the street. Neighbors stood in silence. Mrs. Klein was crying openly. The house across from yours, she said, her voice breaking. He opened the door. Daniel looked across the street. The front door hung open. Inside, smeared across the wall in dark, drying streaks, were 3 words. The count continues. Daniel did not sleep after New Year's Day. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the knock against low, patient, inevitable. It wasn't the sound itself that haunted him, but the certainty behind it. The knock had not been random. It had known his name. It had known he would listen. The town avoided him now. When Daniel stepped outside, Conversations stopped. Curtains closed. Doors locked softly but firmly. Mrs. Klein no longer met his eyes. The diner refused to serve him. At the grocery store, the clerk rang his items without speaking and slid the receipt across the counter like it was something dangerous. Daniel understood why. He had survived the knock, and survival was not forgiveness in Briar Hollow. He began investigating immediately. The house across from his, the one where the man had opened. The door was sealed by police tape, though no officers guarded it. The front door had been repaired, but the stain on the wall remained, scrubbed unsuccessfully. The words "The Count continues" had soaked too deeply into the wood. Daniel snuck inside on the third night. The house was empty except for the smell of metallic old vinyl. The clock in the living room was still mounted on the wall, hands frozen at midnight. Beneath it, carved into the floorboards with fingernails or something sharper, were tally marks. Dozens of them, grouped by years. Daniel counted 70-3, the same number of unexplained New Year's Eve deaths listed in the town's public records in the basement. He found more names, dates, addresses, every victim, every year, every house. The final entry read, Eli Turner, December 31st, ANSW, RED, beneath it, in fresher carving. Next, Daniel, Miasi and Daniel stumbled backward, heart racing. That night, he confronted Mrs. Klein. She didn't deny anything. You weren't supposed to stay, she said quietly as she let him inside her home. People like you never do. What is it? Daniel demanded. What knocks? Mrs. Klein sat down slowly. Her hands shook. It's not a ghost, she said. Not really. It's what we made. 74 years ago, Briar Hollow had been a dying town. Mines collapsed. Jobs vanished. People left. The winter of that year was the coldest on record, and by December, the town was starving. On New Year's Eve, a man named Elliot Crane gathered the remaining residents in the town hall. He claimed he had found a way to save them. A ritual, a promise. One life, Mrs. Klein whispered. 1 minute. Every year. They laughed at him, until midnight came, and something answered. It arrived at 11:59 p.m., not with fire or noise, but with a knock on the town hall door. When Elliot opened it, he died instantly, heart stopped. Face frozen in terror, but the town survived. The next year, the knock returned. They learned quickly. If someone answered, the town was spared. Crops grew. Snowstorms softened. People lived if no one answered. Something else was taken. Children vanished. Houses collapsed. Entire families disappeared. Overnight, so the town made a decision, one sacrifice per year. Chosen quietly, carefully, always someone alone. Someone who wouldn't be missed too loudly. Outsiders were ideal. The knock moves closer every year, Mrs. Klein said. It remembers who escaped. Daniel felt sick, so it chose me. Yes, she said. And it won't stop. That night, Daniel reviewed his recordings. At the very end of the audio from just before midnight, there was something new. Not the voice, another sound. Breathing, not his. Under the floor, the next days blurred together. Daniel stopped eating, stopped sleeping. He felt watched constantly. Mirrors reflected movement behind him. The knocking echoed in his dreams, counting down, closer each time. On December 30th, 1 year later, the town prepared. They didn't hide it anymore. Candles appeared in windows. Doors were reinforced. People whispered prayers, not to God, but to time itself. Mrs. Klein came to Daniel's house one last time. "You can still leave," she said. "If you cross the town line before midnight, it will choose someone else." Daniel looked at the clock. "No," he said. She understood immediately. "You're going to open the door. I'm going to end it." At 11:45 p.m., Daniel set up every recorder he owned. Cameras, audio devices. A final message uploaded on a scheduled delay. At 11:58 p.m., the house grew cold. The knocking came early this time. "Knock." The voice was no longer gentle. "You don't get to choose," it said. "You belong to the Count." Daniel stood at the door, hands shaking but steady. "What are you?" he asked. Silence, then laughter. "I am what waits between years," the voice replied. "I am the moment everyone fears but never sees." The clock read 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 40 seconds. Daniel unlocked the door. The knocking stopped. "You will end the town," the voice warned. Daniel opened the door. Anyway, there was nothing outside. No figure, no shadow, just darkness. And then the house screamed. The walls split open. The floor collapsed inward. Hands, dozens of them, burst from the wood, the walls, the ceiling. Faces emerged, frozen in terror, mouths open mid-scream. Every victim, every year, Daniel was dragged backward. The last thing he said, calm certain, was recorded clearly. "Someone has to stay with you." The clock struck. Midnight. Briar Hollow woke to sunlight for the first time in decades. No police, no bodies, no disappearance. Daniel. Mercer was gone, so was his. House. In its place was an empty lot. Grass grew there now, and every New Year's Eve since. The town gathers at midnight. They don't hide anymore. They listen, because beneath the ground, just before midnight, they hear something new. A single knock, from below, and a voice human, now counting softly. 1 minute left. Story 2, *, the year they stopped, DYNG, the year Willow Creek stopped losing people was the year the town finally believed it had been forgiven. For as long as anyone could remember, death had been a regular visitor there. Not dramatic or violent, just constant. Heart attacks, illnesses, quiet accidents that left houses empty and chairs unfilled. So when New Year's Eve arrived and the entire town gathered in the square, no one expected anything different. They counted down with tired voices, watching cheap fireworks sputter against a cloudy sky, waiting for the year to change and take someone with it. But midnight came, and nothing happened. No sirens, no screams, no phone calls in the night. Instead, people felt lighter, warmer. A woman who had needed an oxygen tank took a full breath and laughed. An old man dropped his cane and stood straight for the first time in years. Pain simply slipped away like it had been forgotten. By morning, the hospital was empty. Doctors were confused but thrilled. Priests called it a miracle. Within days, word spread that Willow Creek was the town where death had stopped. Reporters arrived, then the sick, then the desperate, cancer patients, accident victims, people who had nothing left to lose, and still no one died. Car crashes healed themselves. Strokes reversed. A man who shot himself in the head woke up screaming 3 days later with no wound, no bullet, no explanation. His hair had turned completely white. That was the first detail no one wanted to talk about. The changes were subtle at first. Cuts didn't bleed properly. Bruises stayed longer than they should. People stopped sleeping deeply. Dreams became vivid, looping, filled with pressure and screaming that vanished upon waking. Children complained of hearing whispers beneath their beds, counting softly in numbers that never reached zero. Then Helen Rowe was found standing in her kitchen. She wasn't dead. Her heart beat steadily. Her lungs worked. Her skin was warm, but she didn't respond. Her eyes stared forward without blinking, without recognition, without thought. Doctors called it a coma, but Helen didn't lie down. She stood there for 3 days until her legs gave out. And even then, she kept breathing by spring. There were dozens like her, people whose bodies worked but whose minds were simply gone. They wandered at night, slow and silent, gathering near the old water treatment plant at the edge of town. They never spoke, never ate, never slept. They just stood, facing the ground, as if listening to something deep below. That was when the smell started. Not decay, something worse. Stale, old, like a room that had been closed for too long with people still inside. Mark Ellison, a volunteer EMT, followed one of them one night. He didn't tell anyone. He just watched as the empty-eyed man slipped through a broken fence and disappeared. Down a maintenance hatch beneath the plant, Mark followed. Beneath Willow Creek was a chamber that should not have existed. The walls pulsed faintly, like muscle. The air was thick and warm. And in the center of it all was something vast, layered, and alive, faces pressed into its surface, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with recognition. They were conscious, all of them. A voice filled the chamber, not loud but unavoidable. You asked for more time. Mark understood then. On New Year's Eve, Willow Creek hadn't stopped death. They had trapped it. Every soul that should have passed on was caught in that thing beneath the town, compressed, stacked, aware, while their bodies above continued on, empty and unfinished. When Mark tried to warn the town, they didn't listen. They were too afraid of dying again. So when the next New Year's Eve came, and the voice beneath the ground asked its question, "Shall we continue?" the town answered yes. That night, everyone heard screaming, not outside, inside their heads, and it never stopped. If you visit Willow Creek today, you won't find a ghost town. You'll find a full one. People walking, talking, smiling just a little too slowly. They don't celebrate New Year's anymore, because every year at midnight, beneath their feet, something beats harder. All the faces pressed inside it remember being human. By the time the third New Year approached, Willow Creek no longer pretended it was normal. The town was crowded now. Too crowded. Houses were filled beyond capacity. People slept on floors, in basements, in cars parked along every street. None of them were afraid of accidents anymore. Cars crashed daily. Bones shattered and reformed. Blood spilled and crawled back into wounds, like it was embarrassed to be seen. But something else was spreading. People forgot things. At first it was small names, dates, directions, home. Then it became worse. Faces of loved ones blurred. Emotions dulled. Laughter sounded rehearsed, delayed by a few seconds, as if people had to remember how to react. And the empty ones kept increasing. They no longer waited for night. They stood in groups during the day now, near storm drains, Basements, manholes anywhere, the ground felt thin. Sometimes they hummed. Sometimes they whispered numbers under their breath. Always counting. Always downward. Mark Ellison stopped sleeping altogether. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in the chamber beneath the town. He felt the pressure of thousands of minds stacked together, awake, screaming without sound. He began hearing voices even when he was fully awake, begging, accusing, "Let us go. Finish it, you promised us an ending." Mark realized the truth. The town refused to face what was trapped beneath Willow Creek. Wasn't just death, it was time. The final moment everyone was meant to have. The release had been stolen and compressed into a single, endless instant. And the thing beneath the town was growing stronger every year because it was being fed more unfinished lives. The body could survive without death. The mind could not. The council finally listened when children began to break. Kids stopped aging properly. They grew taller but spoke like toddlers. Some regressed entirely, curling up in corners, sobbing for parents who stood right in front of them. Others became disturbingly calm, staring at adults with expressions too old for their faces. "They know," Mark said at the meeting. "They can hear it clearer than we can." The ground trembled during his words, just slightly. That night, the voice spoke again, this time to everyone. It didn't come from below, it came from inside. "You are full," it said gently. "There is no more room." Panic swept the town. People tried to leave. They couldn't. The roads looped back. GPS failed. Engines stalled at the town limits. Those who walked felt unbearable pressure in their chests until they turned around, gasping for air like fish dragged onto land. No one was allowed to escape anymore. On New Year's Eve, the town didn't gather in the square. They gathered at the water treatment plant. They didn't bring fireworks, they brought tools. Mark stood at the edge of the chamber as cracks split the walls around him. Faces pressed outward harder now, skin thinning, eyes rolling wildly. The voice was no longer calm. "If you release this," it warned, "everything ends." Mark nodded. "That's the point." They opened the chamber at midnight. For one brief, terrible moment, Willow Creek experienced every death that had stolen at once. Bodies aged decades in seconds. Bones collapsed. Organs failed. People screamed as years of pain, illness, and time rushed back into them all at once. The empty ones fell apart instantly, finally allowed to stop. The sound was indescribable, and then silence. When the sun rose, Willow Creek was empty. No bodies, no ruins, no town. Just a wide, quiet valley where grass grew naturally, uninterrupted, except for one thing. Beneath the earth, deep where no one could hear it anymore, something ticked, not loudly, patiently, waiting for the next place that would ask for more time than it was meant to have. Story 3: The Last Sermon, the Town of Redemption. Fools believed it was protected, not by locks, not by weapons, not by the law, by God. The church sat at the center of town like it had always been there, even before the streets were laid, even before the town had a name. Its white wooden walls never peeled, no matter how harsh the winters became. Its bell never rusted. Its doors never warped. Time seemed to slow around it, as if the building existed slightly out of step with the world. Every Sunday, the pews were full. No exceptions. People said miracles happened there. A woman with failing lungs breathed without pain. A child born deaf reacted to the church bell for the first time. Old men lived far longer than doctors predicted, clinging to life just long enough to never miss a service. Attendance was not enforced. It was simply understood. Those who missed Sunday service never stayed absent long. By nightfall, they grew uneasy. They heard whispers in empty rooms. Familiar hymns hummed through walls with no mouths to sing them. Shadows bent toward them at impossible angles. By morning, they returned to the church barefoot, shaking, blood trickling from their ears, begging for forgiveness they could not explain. Father Eliam Crow had been the town's pastor for 32 years. No one remembered a time before him. He never shouted, never threatened hellfire. His sermons were gentle, loving, and deeply uncomfortable in ways people could never quite describe. He spoke softly, slowly, as if addressing something unseen just beyond the congregation. Faith, he often said, smiling kindly, is not believing God listens. It is knowing He is always listening. The people of Redemption Falls loved him. They feared disappointing him even more. On the first Sunday of the new year, the church was fuller than ever. People packed the aisles, stood against the walls, sat on the floor near the altar. The air felt thick, heavy with candle smoke and breath. Father Crow stepped to the pulpit and folded his hands. "The Lord," he said calmly, "has asked for something new." A murmur rippled through the congregation. "He desires closeness," the pastor continued. "A deeper devotion. From now on, our services will last until He is satisfied." No one asked how long that would be. The doors closed quietly behind the last usher. The sound of the locks clicking into place echoed louder than it should have. At first, nothing seemed wrong. The hymns continued. Candles burned steadily. Father Crow preached about obedience, about Abraham's willingness to sacrifice what he loved most, about how true faith was proven through endurance. Time stretched, watches stopped, phones went dark. The windows showed only blackness, no hint of daylight or night. Hunger crept in slowly, then sharply. Thirst followed. Children whimpered until their parents pressed trembling hands over their mouths. When the first man collapsed from exhaustion, Father Crow stepped down from the pulpit. "The Lord sees you," he whispered gently. The man did not get back up. Hours passed, or days. No one could tell. The hymns began to change. They sounded wrong. Melodies bent too low. Harmonies dragging like something wounded. Words shifted mid-verse. People sang sounds instead of language. Mouths moving without permission. A woman screamed suddenly. She pointed at the cross above the altar. The figure nailed to it had changed position, its head tilted downward. Eyes no longer closed. Watching, no one stared for long. Father Crow knelt before the altar, his voice trembling not with fear, but joy. "Thank you for returning," he said. The air grew warmer, heavier. The candles burned black smoke. Shadows gathered where there should have been none, stretching toward the congregation like reaching fingers. People felt pressure in their chests, as if something enormous were leaning down, inhaling deeply. Not air. Faith, hope, fear. Fear. Something vast moved through the church, unseen but undeniable. People sobbed. Others laughed hysterically. A child whispered, "That's not God," before going silent forever. Father Crow rose slowly. His shadow no longer matched his body. "You've done so well," he said softly. "He's so proud." That was when the truth settled over the congregation like a suffocating cloth. They had not been worshipping God. They had been feeding something that learned his voice, and it had finally come home. The moment Father Crow finished speaking, the church breathed. That was the only word for it. The walls expanded and contracted with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Dust fell from the rafters in soft, steady drifts, like ash. The candles guttered, their flames bending inward toward the altar as if drawn by a gravity no one could see. People tried to stand. Their legs refused. An unseen pressure pressed them back into the pews, into the floor, into submission. It wasn't violent. It didn't need to be. It was absolute, like the certainty of gravity, or the passing of time. Father Crow stepped down from the altar. With every step he took, the wood beneath his feet darkened, veins of something wet and black spreading outward like roots. His face remained calm, peaceful, almost reverent. But his eyes reflected too much light, as if something vast was staring out through them. "You feel it now," he said, softly. The closeness. A man near the front screamed and began praying aloud, desperate, frantic words spilling from his mouth. The moment he spoke the name of God, his voice cracked and folded in on itself, turning into a wet, choking sound. His jaw unhinged slightly, and something breathed out of him, not his breath. The shadows near the altar thickened, piling on top of one another until they formed a shape that hurt to look at directly. It was not a body. It was an impression, like the idea of a presence pressing into the room from somewhere impossibly large. The cross behind the altar split with a sound like breaking bone. What hung there was no longer a figure of mercy. Its arms stretched too far. Its face was smooth, featureless, except for a mouth that opened slowly, wider than any human jaw could. From it came a sound that was almost a hymn, almost a scream, almost a command. Father Crow knelt. "We kept them faithful," he said, voice trembling with devotion. "Every week, every prayer, every fear. As you asked, understanding rippled through the congregation too late. Redemption Falls had never been protected. It had been cultivated. Every prayer was a hook. Every hymn a signal. Every act of obedience shaved something away from the people until all that remained was devotion without direction, faith without an object, perfect nourishment. The thing in the church leaned closer. People began to feel it inside them, searching, tasting. Memories surfaced and were pulled away. Regrets vanished. Love dissolved into something flat and useless. What remained was raw belief, stripped of meaning, ripe for consumption. Children went first. They slumped forward, eyes glassy, mouths open in silent awe, as if witnessing something beautiful. Parents screamed until their throats tore, watching their children hollow out while their bodies stayed warm and breathing. The doors of the church burst open at last. Sunlight flooded in and stopped dead at the threshold. It bent away, as if afraid to enter. Outside, the town of Redemption Falls stood empty. No people, no movement. Houses open and abandoned. Cars stalled in the streets with doors hanging wide. Everyone who had ever believed had been here, in this room. For the final service, the thing inhaled deeply. When it exhaled, the church went quiet. Those who remained were no longer screaming. They sat peacefully, smiling faintly, eyes unfocused, alive, devout, empty. Father Crow stood slowly. His body began to sag, collapsing inward like a puppet whose strings had been cut. His purpose fulfilled, he was no longer needed. He crumpled at the foot of the altar, skin graying, eyes wide with sudden terror as realization struck too late. The thing did not look at him again, with a sound like a bell ringing underwater. It withdrew, folding in on itself, slipping backward through the cross. The walls, the space between moments, the shadows thinned. The pressure lifted. The church stood silent, still in the weeks that followed. Travelers passed through the place where Redemption Falls once thrived. They found a pristine town, clean streets, intact homes, and a church at its center, doors wide open. Inside, the pews were full. The people did not move, did not speak, did not blink, but every Sunday, at the exact same hour, they opened their mouths in perfect unison and sang No. One recognized the hymn, and somewhere far beyond the sound of human hearing, something listened, patiently waiting for the next congregation that would confuse obedience with salvation. Story 4 *. The year they did not celebrate, the town of Hollow Creek did not welcome the new year. It endured it every December. Outsiders noticed the change. The roads emptied earlier than usual. Store windows went dark without holiday decorations. Even the gas station on the highway shut its doors days before the year ended. Its pumps wrapped in chains like the place had been abandoned in a hurry. If anyone asked why, the answers were always vague. Bad memories, people said. Old traditions. Nothing worth celebrating. No one ever stayed long enough to press further. Those who lived in Hollow Creek knew better than to ask questions out loud. The rules were simple and unspoken, passed down in fragments from parent to child, from neighbor to neighbor, from silence to silence. Stay inside. Do not invite attention. Do not acknowledge what comes. By the afternoon of December 31st, the town felt hollow in a way that had nothing to do with emptiness. Cars remained parked in driveways. Curtains were drawn tight. Even the air seemed heavier, thicker, like something unseen had settled between the houses. Inside the Miller home, 3 generations sat together without speaking. The television stayed dark. The windows were covered with blankets, not to block light, but to block sight. The youngest child, Evan, fidgeted restlessly, his excitement for the new year slowly draining into confusion. "Why is everyone so quiet?" he asked. No one answered. His grandmother, Ruth Miller, sat rigid in her chair, hands folded tightly in her lap. Her lips moved silently, repeating words she had learned as a child, phrases that meant nothing on their own, but were said anyway, because not saying them felt dangerous. Across town, Arthur Bell sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at the door. He had lived in Hollow Creek his entire life, long enough to know that solitude offered no protection. That morning, he had found a piece of paper tucked neatly into his mailbox. No envelope, no handwriting he recognized, just a single sentence. Do not leave your house tonight, Arthur. Hadn't needed the warning. As darkness settled, the town became unnaturally still. No wind rustled the trees. No dogs barked. No distant engines passed on the highway. It was as if Hollow Creek had been sealed off from the rest of the world, placed gently under a glass dome where nothing new could enter. Then the sound began. It was faint at first, easy to mistake for shifting snow or the groan of old wood. But it grew steadier as it moved, dragging itself slowly through the streets. Something heavy, something patient. Inside their homes, people froze. Some pressed their backs against walls. Others sank to their knees. Children were pulled close, mouths covered to keep them quiet. No one dared look outside, but everyone knew where it was. It stopped in front of each house, not long, just enough, in the Miller home. Evan leaned closer to the wall, his ear pressed against the cold plaster. "Someone's breathing," he whispered. His mother grabbed him and yanked him back so hard he cried out. Ruth stood suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. For a moment, everyone feared the noise had been enough. They waited. The breathing outside continued, slow, deliberate, enjoying itself. Arthur. Bell heard a soft knock at his back door. Just one, careful, polite. He did not move. The knock came again, lower this time, as if whoever stood outside had crouched down. "Arthur," a voice called softly. It was his brother's voice. The same tone, the same warmth, the same familiar cadence that made his chest ache. His brother had been buried 10 years ago, in another house. A woman named Lillian Harper broke tradition. Fear outweighed obedience. She pulled the curtain aside, just enough to see what stood in the street did not belong to any single shape. It dragged itself forward on uneven limbs, its body a wrong arrangement of parts that did not fit together properly. Patches of clothing clung to its coat. Shirts, scarves each, one recognizable as something that once belonged to someone in town. Tart faces were stitched into it, some smiling, some screaming, all watching it. Paused beneath a streetlight and turned its head slowly, savoring the glow as if light itself pleased it. When Lillian gasped, its head snapped toward her house, and it smiled wider, across Hollow Creek. Porch lights flicked on, not because anyone wanted them to, because whatever walked the streets wanted to be seen.
No one in Hollow Creek slept that night. They sat in their homes listening as the thing continued its slow journey through the town, stopping at each house, lingering just long enough to be felt. The dragging sound scraped along pavement, then paused. Breathing followed. Sometimes a whisper. Sometimes a voice that belonged to someone long dead. At Arthur Bell's back door, the voice changed. "Arthur," it said again, closer now. "You promised." Arthur squeezed his eyes shut. He remembered the promise. Everyone did, eventually. The town had survived because of it. Because years ago, when something first came to Hollow Creek and refused to leave, the people had learned what it wanted. Recognition. Not celebration. Not worship. Just acknowledgement. Once a year, they allowed it to walk their streets, to see their faces, to remember what it had taken and what it was still owed. Arthur stood on shaking legs and moved away from the door. He pressed his forehead against the wall and whispered, "You already took him." The breathing outside deepened, pleased. At the Miller house, Ruth finally spoke aloud. Her voice was thin, cracked with age and terror. "We kept our end," she said, not knowing if the thing could hear her through walls. "We kept it quiet. We kept them inside." Evan began to cry again. This time, no one tried to stop him. The breathing outside their house grew louder. In Lillian Harper's home, the front door handle began to turn slowly, testing resistance. She screamed and backed away as the lock rattled. The thing outside did not force its way in. It never did. It waited. Because eventually, someone always opened the door. Down the street, a porch light burst, glass shattering as the thing brushed beneath it. It flinched, just slightly, then straightened as if offended. The stitched faces along its body twisted, mouths opening and closing, speaking fragments of old conversations. Laughter from past summers. Arguments never resolved. Final words spoken in hospital rooms. The town itself seemed to shrink as it moved, houses leaning inward, streets narrowing, as if Hollow Creek wanted to fold around it and disappear. The first door opened. A man stepped outside barefoot, eyes hollow. He didn't scream. He didn't resist. He simply walked toward the thing and reached out. It embraced him. Not violently, gently. When it released him, he collapsed into the snow, empty. Still breathing. Still warm. But something essential had been taken, something that would never return. That was how it fed. Not on bodies. On years. On futures. On the pieces of people that carried them forward. Across Hollow Creek, more doors opened. Parents stepped outside while children watched from behind windows. Elderly couples held hands as they approached it together. Some whispered apologies. Some thanked it. Those who stayed inside felt the weight increase. The pressure in their homes grew unbearable, walls creaking, floors bowing slightly, as if the thing were testing which houses would break. Arthur could hear it coming back. The dragging sound returned closer now, stopping directly behind his door. "Your last," the voice said. Not threatening. Certain. Arthur opened the door. The cold hit him first. Then the smell, old fabric, dust, and something like earth freshly turned. The thing loomed over him, its many eyes blinking independently. "You kept us alive," Arthur whispered. "That has to count for something." The thing leaned closer, faces shifting, searching. "Alive is not the same as moving forward," it replied, in a dozen voices at once. It reached out and touched Arthur's chest. Arthur screamed as years ripped away from him in an instant, memories collapsing, plans dissolving, hope thinning to nothing. When it released him, he fell backward into his house, staring at the ceiling with a vacant smile. Satisfied, the thing turned away. By morning, Hollow Creek was quiet again. The streets were empty. The snow lay undisturbed. Doors stood open in several houses, heat running, meals half prepared. People who had given themselves were gone entirely. Those who remained sat where they had fallen, alive but diminished, shadows of who they had been the night before. The town endured. It always did. Weeks later, outsiders passed through Hollow Creek and felt something wrong they couldn't name. A heaviness. A sadness without cause. They noticed how the people moved slower, spoke less, smiled rarely. If anyone asked about New Year's Eve, the locals would shrug. "Nothing happened," they said. And that was true. Nothing happened. Something was allowed to continue. And next year, when the streets emptied early and the lights went dark, Hollow Creek would endure it again, because surviving had become more important than living, and the town had long since forgotten the difference. Story 5. The Fireworks That Never Ended, USA. Sundown Valley sits in the high desert of southern Arizona, 3 hours from anything that matters. One highway cuts through it, then leaves just as quickly. The town exists because of an old gypsy plant that shut down 20 years ago. After that, the people who stayed were the ones who either could not leave or did not want to explain why they never would. New Year's Eve in Sundown Valley always involved fireworks. Not a show. Not a permit. Just people lighting whatever they had in their yards, on rooftops, in the empty lots between trailers. The dry air carried the sound forever. Pops echoed off the mesas. The sky filled with brief color, and then went black again. I took the overnight security job at the old gypsum plant because it paid cash and nobody asked questions. My shift started at 10 p.m. on December 31st and ended at sunrise. Easy money. Sit in a shack, watch the cameras, keep kids from sneaking in. The supervisor handed me the keys and said one thing before leaving. "When the fireworks stop, you leave." "What if it's not my shift end?" I asked. He looked at me like I missed something obvious. "That is your shift end." The security shack sat just inside the fence line. From there, I could see half the town. Trailers scattered across dirt lots. A few houses. One closed gas station with a flickering sign. No streetlights past the highway. At 10:45, The first fireworks started. Normal. Kids setting off Baja rockets early. A few loud cracks from homemade stuff. I leaned back, drank my coffee, and watched the cameras. The plant building stood dark and silent, concrete hulks against the desert. By 11:30, the fireworks were everywhere. Not synchronized. Not planned. Just constant noise. Color flashing over rooftops. Smoke drifting low and thin. At 11:59, I expected a final rush. A big burst. People counting down. Instead, the fireworks stopped. All at once. No echo. No fade out. Just silence so sudden it felt like pressure in my ears. I checked my watch. 11:58. I waited. Nothing happened. No countdown. No cheers. No final shots. Then, at exactly midnight, one firework launched from somewhere near the center of town. It went up slow. Too slow. It burst without color. No spark. Just a dull flash and a deep sound that vibrated through the shack walls. Then another launched. And another. All from different places. All identical. No color. No celebration. The cameras flickered. On screen 3, I saw something move between two trailers. Not a person. Too tall. Too narrow. It crossed the frame without breaking stride, like it wasn't bound to the ground. I rewound. The playback skipped. The fireworks kept launching. One every few seconds. Same dull flash. Same heavy sound. Not loud, but felt more than heard. My radio crackled. "Anyone still out?" A voice asked. Not panicked. Curious. Another voice answered. "Yeah. You see that too?" I keyed the mic. "This is plant security. What's going on?" Silence. Then the radio spoke again, but not to me. "They're early this year." That voice was not local. The fireworks increased. One every second now. The sky above Sundown Valley filled with pale flashes that lit the desert in harsh white. No smoke. No color. Just light and sound and vibration. I remembered what the supervisor said. When the fireworks stop, you leave. But they were not stopping. They were accelerating. On the cameras, doors began opening. Trailers. Houses. People stepping out into the dirt, heads tilted back, watching the sky. Not cheering. Not filming. Just watching. One man stood in the middle of the road, arms hanging loose, face lit white over and over by the flashes. He did not blink. Another camera showed a woman walking away from her house barefoot, following something off screen. The radio crackled again. "This is not New Year," someone said quietly. "This is roll call." A shadow passed over the shack window, blocking the light for a full second. I froze. Outside, something landed. Not hard. Controlled. The fireworks did not stop. They were getting closer. The shadow moved away from the shack window, but the darkness it left behind felt heavier, like the air itself had thickened. I stayed still, listening. Outside, the fireworks kept launching. No color. No celebration. Just those dull white flashes and the deep impact sound that shook the ground under my boots. Each one felt closer than the last, like the sky itself was stepping down toward the town. I forced myself to look at the cameras again. Screen 2 showed the highway. Empty. No cars leaving. No headlights coming in. Screen 5 showed the gas station. Its flickering sign had gone dark. A group of people stood beneath it, facing the desert, perfectly still. One of them lifted an arm and pointed slowly, like they were being instructed. Screen 3 caught my breath in my throat. The tall shape was back. It stood between two trailers, fully visible now. It was not thin like a shadow. It had depth. Shape. Limbs that bent wrong. Its head brushed the power line, but the line did not move. The thing tilted its head toward the camera, like it could see me through the screen. The radio crackled again. "They're lining up," a voice said. "Same spots as last time. Another voice answered, shaking. No. No, that was before the mine collapse. That was before. Static swallowed the rest. I grabbed the radio. This is plant security. What is happening? The response came immediately. You're too close, someone said. You shouldn't be watching. The fireworks launched faster now. Every half second. The sound overlapped, a constant pressure that rattled my teeth. Outside the shack, footsteps moved through the gravel. Slow, heavy, multiple. I remembered the supervisor's words again. When the fireworks stop, you leave. I understood it now. The fireworks were not celebration. They were markers, signals, something counting arrivals. I shoved the radio aside and reached for the shack door. My hand froze inches from the handle. Someone knocked. Not hard. Not urgent. 3 slow taps. I backed away, hard hammering. Through the thin metal wall, a voice spoke. Close. Come. You're late. The cameras flickered wildly, then steadied. On every screen, the same thing appeared. The desert. Not as it looked now, but as it must have looked decades ago. No trailers. No road. No plant. Just open land under a bright white sky filled with identical flashes. Figures stood across it in long rows. Hundreds of them. All facing the same direction. All motionless. Then the image snapped back to the present. The tall shape outside shifted, and the shack wall dented inward slightly, like something had leaned against it to test its strength. The radio came alive again, louder than before. This was never a town, the voice said. It's a place where the ground remembers. Another firework launched directly overhead. The shack ceiling vibrated. Dust fell. I ran. I burst out the back door and sprinted for the fence, boots slipping on loose dirt. The cold air burned my lungs. Behind me, the ground thudded as something landed, then another. The fence gate was open. It had not been open earlier. I did not question it. I ran through and kept going, toward the highway lights in the distance. Behind me, the fireworks reached a constant roar, no longer separate sounds but a single endless impact. I glanced back once. Sundown Valley was lit bright as day. Every figure I had seen on the cameras now stood in the open, arranged in long straight lines stretching into the desert. Between them moved the tall shapes, placing people where they belonged, adjusting positions with gentle, precise touches. One of the shapes turned its head toward me. The fireworks stopped. The silence hit like a wall. I did not stop running until I reached the highway and flagged down a truck that nearly hit me. By the time anyone returned to Sundown Valley the next morning, the town was quiet. Too quiet. Houses stood open. Cars sat where they had been parked. No signs of struggle. No people. Officials called it a mass disappearance. Some blamed a cult. Others blamed the desert. The plant was sealed. The area was marked unsafe. But every year, on December 31st, drivers on the highway report flashes in the distance. White. Colorless. One after another. They say it sounds like fireworks. They say it never feels like celebration. And they say that if you stop to watch, you start to feel like you're late for something you don't remember agreeing to. I don't go near Arizona anymore. But every New Year's Eve, just before midnight, I listen. And I swear I can still hear it. One final launch, waiting for someone else to notice. Story 6. The first sunrise was missing, Australia. Tallow Creek is a small cattle town in western New South Wales where the land is flat enough to make you feel exposed. One main road. A pub. A school. A fuel stop that closes before dark. At night, there is nothing to block the sky. No hills. No trees tall enough to hide behind. Just open land and the feeling that whatever is out there can see you long before you see it. I arrived on December 30th to help my older sister sell our grandfather's house. He had died quietly in October. Stroke in his sleep. That was the official version. The unofficial version was that he had stayed up all night waiting for something that never came. The locals did not like talking about it. They were polite, smiling. But every conversation ended early, like everyone was conserving energy for something later. When I mentioned staying through New Year's Day, the woman at the fuel stop stopped pumping halfway through. "You don't want to be here for the first sunrise," she said. "I've seen plenty of sunrises," I replied. She shook her head. "Not ours." That night, my sister told me the same thing. "We leave before dawn," she said, packing boxes too fast. "I don't care if the paperwork isn't done." "What happens at dawn?" I asked. She did not answer. She just taped another box and avoided my eyes. New Year's Eve in Tallow Creek was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. No fireworks, no music, no parties. The pub closed at 9. Lights went off across town one by one until only a few houses remained lit. At midnight, nothing happened. No cheering, no noise, no horns on the highway. The silence felt heavy, like the land was holding its breath. I stepped outside onto the porch. The stars were sharp and bright. The air smelled like dust and dry grass. Somewhere far away, a cow lowed once, then went quiet. I checked my phone. No service. Inside, my sister was asleep on the couch, exhaustion finally catching her. I stayed awake, listening. At around 3 a.m., I heard movement outside. Not footsteps. Something larger. Slow. Dragging. Like weight shifting across dirt. I peered through the window. Nothing. But the sound continued, circling the property, stopping just out of sight, starting again when I moved away from the glass. By 4:30, the sky should have begun to change. A faint light. A soft gray. Something. It stayed black. The stars did not fade. The horizon did not glow. It was as if the night had stalled. At 5:10, the neighbor's dog began barking. High-pitched. Panicked. Then it yelped once and went silent. I shook my sister awake. "It's not getting light," I whispered. She sat up, eyes already wide, like she had been expecting this. "We have to stay inside," she said. "Do not go out until it shows itself." "Shows what?" I asked. She swallowed. "The sun. Or whatever comes instead." At 5:45, the town began to stir. Not people. Shadows moved across the road. Long shapes stretching where no light source existed. Doors creaked open down the street, then slammed shut again. A voice carried through the darkness, calm and distant, not shouting. "Step outside. You need to see this." It did not sound threatening. It sounded reasonable. Inviting. The voice repeated, moving closer from house to house. "Everyone should see the first sunrise." My sister pulled me away from the window. "Do not answer," she said. "It learns your voice if you do." The sky remained unchanged. No dawn. No birds. No wind. Just endless night pressing down on the town. Then something appeared on the horizon. Not light. A shape. Wide. Low. Spreading across the land where the sun should rise. It moved like a shadow being poured upward, swallowing the stars as it climbed. The voice outside softened. "This is the new year," it said. "Come welcome it." Someone screamed down the street. Then another. Then nothing. I backed away from the door, heart pounding, as the shadow continued to rise, replacing the sky piece by piece. And that was when I realized something worse. The darkness was not coming toward us. It was already here. It had just been waiting for us to notice. The voice moved closer with each repetition. Not louder, just nearer, like distance no longer mattered. "Step outside. You need to see this." From the front window, I saw Mrs. Calder from 2 houses down open her door. She stood barefoot on the dirt, nightdress fluttering, eyes fixed on the horizon. The shadow there had grown wider now, stretching upward like spilled ink climbing the sky. My sister grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "She's not seeing the sun," she whispered. "She's seeing what it wants her to see." Mrs. Calder took one step forward, then another. Her body began to change its shape, not violently, not suddenly. It was subtle. Her shoulders slumped too far forward. Her neck lengthened as she leaned, like gravity pulled her toward the horizon instead of the ground. She did not scream. She smiled. Then she walked into the darkness and vanished, as if the night itself had opened its mouth. The voice spoke again, closer now. Right outside our house. This year needs witnesses. Something scraped along the side of the building. Not claws. Not tools. A broad surface dragging slowly, like a massive body adjusting its position. The stars above us began to blink out. Not fade. Blink. One by one, as if turned off. My sister dragged me into the hallway and shut every door leading to the outside. She pushed furniture against them with the strength of someone who had done this before. "How do you know all this?" I asked, my voice shaking. She swallowed. "Granddad stayed 1 year. He wanted to see it." "What did he see?" She met my eyes. "He said the sun came up wrong. He said it was too close. Like it had leaned down to look at him." A deep vibration rolled through the ground. Not an earthquake. A pressure. The house creaked as if something massive had shifted its weight nearby. From outside came a new sound. Footsteps. Many of them. Slow. Uncoordinated. Coming from every direction. Through a crack in the curtain, I saw silhouettes moving through the street. Neighbors. People I had seen at the fuel stop. At the pub. All walking toward the same point. Toward the horizon. Their heads were tilted back. Their mouths moved in unison. Not counting. Chanting. First light. First light. First light. The shadow at the horizon lifted higher. It was no longer flat. It had depth now. Curves. Layers. Like something unfolding. Then the voice changed. It stopped pretending to be calm. "This land has been waiting," it said, no longer coming from one place but everywhere at once. "Every year you mark time. Every year you celebrate survival. Tonight you belong to the land again." Something struck the roof. Not hard. Heavy. The ceiling bowed slightly. Dust fell. I realized then that the darkness was not above us. It was around us. The house lights flickered once and went out. Complete darkness swallowed the rooms. The only light came from outside, a dull wrong glow seeping through the cracks like moonlight filtered through skin. My sister pressed something into my hand. A car key. "Liuta," she whispered. "Back gate. If we can reach the highway before it finishes rising." "What happens if it finishes?" I asked. She did not answer. We moved through the back of the house, slow and silent. The chanting outside grew louder, closer. The silhouettes clustered together now, forming a loose procession toward the horizon. We slipped out the back door. The air outside felt thick, like breathing through cloth. The sky was no longer black. It was dark brown, streaked with veins of dull light that pulsed slowly. The shadow had risen halfway. I could see it clearly now. It was not a shape. It was an absence. A section of sky where nothing reflected. No stars. No clouds. Just a vast hollow pressing downward. The chanting stopped. Every head turned toward us at once. Dozens of faces caught the dim glow. Eyes too reflective. Smiles stretched too wide. The voice spoke through all of them. "You are late." We ran. The ground seemed to resist us, like the dirt had softened. Each step took more effort than it should have. Behind us, the crowd followed, not running, not rushing, but never losing distance. Yuda sat by the fence. My sister fumbled with the lock, hands shaking. I turned once and saw something detached from the shadow above. A long limb of darkness reaching down, slow and careful, like it did not want to startle us. The engine roared to life. As we tore down the dirt track, the chanting resumed, louder now, frantic. First light. First light. The horizon behind us brightened. Not yellow. Not orange. White. Blinding. Close. The road bucked under the tires. The sky screamed. Not a sound, but a pressure that made my ears ring and my vision blur. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. We burst onto the highway. The sky snapped back to normal darkness. Stars returned. Wind returned. Sound returned. In the rearview mirror, Tallow Creek was gone. Not destroyed. Not dark. Gone. Just flat, empty land where a town had been hours earlier. The sun rose normally that morning. When we reached the next town, no one believed us. Maps showed nothing where Tallow Creek should have been. Records listed it as abandoned decades ago. My sister and I never went back. But every new year, just before dawn, I wake with the same feeling. Like the sky is waiting. Like somewhere, a first sunrise is still trying to arrive. And it is patient.
Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Terramouth.